Hey, I'm Siobhan, and I love talking about all the things related to freedom and personal growth. And I'm on a journey to redefine freedom on my own terms as I become the woman I desire to be. Each week, I'll share in real time what I'm learning as I do my inner work while creating a safe space for my listeners to feel seen. If you desire to be free and live a life that feels good to you, then you're in the right place for beautiful conversations that's going to support you on your journey to freedom. Welcome to the Siobhan J. Middleton podcast. Now let's start the show. Hey, welcome back to another episode of my podcast. You already know I'm so happy that you are here again for another week to be inspired to redefine freedom on your own terms. I want to remind you that this podcast is for anyone, meaning men or women, whoever desire to be free and live the life that you desire on your own terms. So just want to make sure that I remind people that anyone who wants to create the life that they desire to live, this podcast is for you. And so today I want to share 8 books about feminine energy and sensuality that I believe you should add to your library because I think that they're going to be really, really beneficial. So back in 2017, I went to a self-care retreat in New Orleans that was hosted by my great friend Tara. And I remember one of the speakers was Stevie, who is the founder of Black Women Are for Grown-Ups. And totally, you should check out her work if you're not familiar with it already. But anywho, at the conference, one thing that stood out about Stevie that I noticed, her talk was amazing. And also she owned the room. Like you could just sense the feminine power and the energy that she embodied, right? And so later on, I think that day or maybe the next day, I sent her a DM and I told her like, hey, I see that you really like embody like your feminine energy. Are there any books that you would recommend for me to read? Because I'm trying to tap into that energy myself and I want a good starting point. And so she was the one who recommended that I read Women Who Run with the Wolves. Now, keep in mind, this was back in 2017. So I had got the book, I had purchased it while I think I was on a trip to DC. And I had started, I did. I purchased it from Bus Boys and Poets in DC. And I was so excited about it. I'm like, all right, I'm ready. I'm about to read this book, right? And I could not get through it. It was a very challenging read. And I put that book down for 2 years because I could not grasp the concepts that was in the book. Fast forward to 2019, I picked it up again and was able to breeze right through it. And I don't know if you're like me, but there's sometimes a book can really resonate with you and you can just read it in that moment. But then sometimes you may have to put it down and come back to it because depending on where you're at in your life, you may not be able or be ready to receive the information. And I think that that is what I was experiencing. And that's why it was so difficult for me to understand when I first got the book. But I have to think back of where I was in my life at that time. And I was not ready to receive it. And then in 2019, when I pick it up again, I'm like, I am going to devour this book. It's a book of myths and stories for wild women, or the wild woman archetype. I also will listen to the audiobook. The author actually reads it, and she has a very soothing voice. So this is one of those books that I believe you should have in your library, and also is a book that you will circle back to again and again. And then if you find it difficult to understand while reading it, highly recommend that you listen to the audiobook. And then in 2020, I read the book Untamed, and I talked a lot about Untamed on this podcast. And if you want to hear my key takeaways about the book, I have done an episode on that, so you can kind of scroll back and find it. But I remember when I was reading Untamed, I felt like this was the perfect book that I needed as the next book after Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I remember when I was reading Untamed, I'm like, man, this feels very much like Women Who Run with the Wolves, but on a more contemporary level, if you will. And what Untamed helped me realize is that at that point in my life when I read it, which was back in 2020, what I felt like is that I was in a cage and there was this wild part of me that yearned to be free. And it reminded me of the book, Woman Who Run with the Wolves. And as I was reading the book, I realized how caged I was, but how I longed to be free. And so those two books, which Untamed, I'm not adding to this list. I've talked about it so much, so it's not a part of the 8 books. But those 2 books were the starting point of me, like, really beginning to be free. Ever since then, I've been working on being more true to myself and embracing my wild side and learning more about my feminine energy and sensuality and really just trying to discover more about myself. And when I use the word wild woman, I believe every woman has this part, right? I think we have had to suppress that part of ourselves for many different reasons. And I know for myself, there's always been this curiosity about being more sensual and more feminine. But over the years, based on the friendships and relationships that I was in, there wasn't space to kind of discover it. And then I was in my own mind. And I guess there are ways that I kept my own self in bondage, if you will. And so now that I am more free than I've ever been, I'm really doing the inner work around healing parts of myself, but then also learning how, as a woman, can I be more sensual? How can I lean more into my feminine energy and that goddess energy? That is what I'm on right now. The books that I'm about to share with you, they're all a part of my library. However, I have not read them all. But I read enough of each one where I'm like, oh, every person needs to have these books in their library. And so you can decide from there as I'm telling you about each one. So I've already talked about the first one, which is Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I'm going to read a little bit of the back so that you have an idea what it's about. It says, within every woman, there lives a powerful force filled with good instincts, passionate creativity, and ageless knowing. She is the wild woman who represents the instinctual nature of women, but she is an endangered species. In Women Who Run with the Wolves, Dr. Estes unfolds rich intercultural myths, fairy tales, and stories, many from her own family, in order to help women reconnect with the fierce, healthy, visionary attributes of this instinctual nature. Through the stories and commentaries in this remarkable book, we retrieve, examine, love, and understand the wild woman and hold her against our deep psyches as one who is both magic and medicine. Dr. Estes has created a new lexicon for describing the female psyche, fertile and life-giving. It is a psychology of women in the truest sense, a knowing of the soul. Again, I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. The next book is called Pussy Prayers by Black Girl Bliss, Sacred and Sensual Rituals for Wild Women of Color. And I love this book. It's a quick read. I love that there's journal prompts and rituals, and it flows so effortlessly that you don't have to read from cover to cover. You can kind of skip around and get what you need at any point. But I think it's a beautiful book to have to your library. The author has several other books as well that I'm going to pick up, but this is the first one that I purchased. And the back says, Pussy Prayers is about rekindling your connection to your pleasure center, the space through which you manifest and create worlds, regardless of the body parts you do or don't have. These pages speak to the unique experience of women of color in order to help them heal from trauma and learn how to powerfully conjure up a life that is dripping with sweetness. Oh, I like that. All by getting in touch with the one part of yourself that was divinely designed for pleasure. Here you'll find stories, sister girl talk, and practical, easy-to-do rituals to begin your personal journey of understanding the importance of pleasure, its connection to manifestation, and ways to increase your power so that you can enjoy everyday deliciousness. So the third book is titled Sensual Self, and it's by Evan Whitney, Prompts and Practices for Getting in Touch with Your Body. And I have gifted a few copies of this book, and it's more like a journal. So there's a lot of prompts, but then there's little excerpts by the author as well. But this is something that you can add to your library and use it as needed. I keep it on my nightstand so that when I'm in the mood to write or journal, it's right there for me. Book number 4 is called The Ethical Slut by Janet Hardy and Dossie Easton. And the back says, it's the guide of choice for people curious to move beyond conventional monogamy and for anyone interested in learning better skills for love, sex, and intimacy. The Ethical Slut will open you up to the adventure and freedom that comes from redefining the way you relate to friends and lovers. Janet Hardy and Dossie Easton offer the technique, skills, and ideals they have developed for practicing successful and ethical polyamory through open communication, emotional honesty, and managing jealousy. And the reason that I picked this book up, number one, it had high reviews on Amazon, and I'm just curious about other ways that relationships can be outside of monogamy. And I just want to be informed because I only know of monogamous relationships, so I'm really curious about different types. And so that is why I picked that one up. Book number 5 is Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, which is written by Adrienne Marie Brown. And this book is like, it's not like you read it cover to cover. It's like a lot of short excerpts, different authors in the book, short stories, if you will, all about pleasure. So I think it's a beautiful book to help you learn more about pleasure and why you should embody it. I'll read the back to you. It says, how do we make social justice the most pleasurable human experience? How can we awaken within ourselves desires that make it impossible to settle for anything less than a fulfilling life? Author and editor Adrienne Marie Brown finds the answer in something she calls pleasure activism, a politics of healing and happiness that explodes the door myth that changing the world is just another form of work. Drawing on the Black feminist tradition, she challenges us to rethink the ground rules of activism. Her mindset-altering essays are interwoven with conversations and insights from other feminist thinkers, including Audre Lorde, Joan Morgan, Cara Page, Sonia Renee Taylor, and Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Together, they cover a wide array of subjects from sex work to climate change, from race and gender to sex and drugs, building new narratives about how politics can feel good and how what feels good always has a complex politics of its own. Book number 6 is Come As You Are by Dr. Emily Nagoski. And this book, actually, there is a Netflix special, if I'm not mistaken, that you can watch as well. I cannot remember the title of it. But the tagline says, how to transform your sex life into one filled with confidence and joy. Researchers have spent the last decade trying to develop a pink pill for women to function like Viagra does for men. So where is it? Well, for reasons this book makes crystal clear, the pill will never be the answer. But as a result of the research that's gone into, scientists have discovered surprising truths about what does work to maximize women's sexual well-being, including turning on the ons, turning off the offs, take control of the context, and a responsive desire. So I like this book. I started reading it a couple of years ago. I have not finished it, but it even says the surprising new science that will transform your sex life. So if you're more into the science of how our bodies work, highly recommend it. And it is a easy read. Like, it's not like too much. Book number 7 is Black Erotica, which is edited by Miriam DeCosta Willis and Reginald Martin and Roseanne Bale. So the back says, in this glorious, unprecedented anthology, Black writers celebrate Black sensuality. African, African-American, Latin American, and Caribbean American men and women, gay and straight, novelists, poets, essayists, and scholars provide a wealth of erotic delights ranging from lyrical to provocative to the shockingly explicit. Celebratory and bold, triumphant and heady, this collection reclaims the fullness of Black life. It is an extraordinary work of lasting value for all lovers of literature and especially the erotic. And I remember when I bought this book, I was in New Orleans. I went to this Black-owned bookstore, and this book stood out to me, and I've had it for about 4 or 5 years now. And I like reading it every now and then because there's just all these poems and short stories that, yeah, they're really pleasurable. I'll say that. And lastly, book number 8 is Pussy, a Reclamation by Regina Thomasshore. And this is the book that I'm currently reading. I'm on chapter 2. And what I love about this book is that it is unpacking the word pussy and why it has been used in a negative way and like how to take back your power with the word. It also is about like tapping into your inner goddess and how to do that. I've already been journaling about some of the prompts in the book, and it is an excellent read thus far. And I've been taking my time with it because I'm journaling as I read it, but highly, highly, highly recommend it. So those are the 8 books that I highly recommend that you add to your library. If you have read any of them, shoot me a DM on Instagram and let me know which one you read. If you know of a book that I need to add to my list, please shoot me a DM and let me know. And then lastly, if you decide to read any of the books that I shared, make sure that you let me know that as well. And all of these books, you will find it in my Amazon shop, which is an affiliate link. So you'll see that there. And that link will be in the show notes. I am so proud of myself for recording this episode. And I'm going to tell you why. I have been wanting to talk about sensuality and feminine energy, goddess energy, for a couple of years now. But I was nervous, and I know it was because of where I was in my life at the time. And now I want to have more conversations about this topic. And so this is a starting point by sharing the books that I'm reading and letting you into like my world. And then we'll see what we'll uncover from here. So if there is a thought, a topic, a question that you would like answered, whether privately in the DMs or email, or if you want me to discuss something on the podcast anonymously, let me know. I am going to be doing some research, and I want to begin to have guests on my podcast again soon. And this is one of the conversations that I'm going to be having. I'm going to talk about this independently, but also bring on guests who can have this conversation with me as it relates to like sensuality, because I believe women specifically is that for many different reasons, we don't embody our feminine energy, our goddess energy, our sensuality. And I want to tap into that. And so that's what I'm on. And y'all know I be sharing with y'all in real life what's happening in my world. And so as I'm learning, I'm going to continue to share with you guys. If this episode has been inspiring in any way, you can treat me to a cup of coffee. That link is in the show notes. Thank you every week to everyone who always does that for me. Y'all know the reason that I ask y'all to treat me to coffee because I absolutely love coffee. It is a part of my ritual, and it is pleasurable. I'll tell you that, like the whole process that I go through to create my cup of coffee, it gives me the utmost pleasure. And so when you treat me to coffee, I'm buying a bag of coffee or maybe when I'm out and about. And so I thank you in advance for that. And again, that link is in the show notes. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, please subscribe. Share my podcast with a friend that you think would want to go along on this journey to learn how to redefine their freedom. You can share it on social media. Just tag me when you do it so I can reshare it. And then please subscribe to my newsletter where I go a little bit more in depth in my writing, and I share more resources and things like that. You can become a free subscriber and get a newsletter every time I send one out. And also there's a way to become a paid subscriber as well. And that's pretty much supporting me as I support my college student that I have. And I'm going to do an episode about that soon because last weekend we took my daughter, when I say we, me and my son, took my daughter to the college that she's going to be attending in the fall, which is Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. And I want to share that experience with you guys. So stay tuned for that. And I'm going to be writing about it as well. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you deeply as a listener. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for supporting. And until next time, sending you so much love and light.